Hey guys, I hope you're all well. So today I was going to quickly outline the exam structure for the Greek Fit exam of A-level OCR Classics. So if you do Classics and do Greek Fit exam, because now OCR is the only exam board that offers A-level Classics, Classical Civilization. This should be useful. I'm just going to go quickly, like how long the exam is, the amount of marks, the sort of questions, etc. So without further ado, I'll go straight into it. So this exam is generally the second exam that you'll take. You have three classics exams: the World of the Hero, which is like the Odyssey slash Iliad, and the Aeneid, which is longer, and then you have Greek theatre or another exam, depending on what your teacher chooses, and then you have another exam. This is generally takes place a week after the hero exam, which is usually one of the usually one of, if not the first exam. So Greek theatre should be quite early on in your like exam timetable. In this unit, you study three plays. Um, two tragedies: Oedipus the King by Sophocles and Bacchae by Euripides, and one comedy, Frogs by Aristophanes. Whether you find it funny or not, it is a comedy. Um, and so this is and you also study 14 visual sources. So these include two theaters, and these also include 12 vases, and but more on that later. So this exam is an hour and 45 minutes long. If you have 25% extra time, it is 2 hours and roughly 12 minutes long, and it is 75 marks, and it is 30% of your whole A level. Um, unless you do AS, in which case I think it's 50%. But then if you do AS, then this video don't don't take notice of it, because the exam structure for AS is completely different. But so there are five short answer questions. There are two 10-mark questions. There is one 20-mark question, and there is one big 30-mark question. So I'll get straight into it first. The short questions. So there are going to be 5 marks worth of short questions. By short questions, I mean questions which are 1 or 2 marks. So you could get 5 1-mark questions, though I think that's unlikely. You could get one 2-mark question and 3 1-mark questions, or two 2-mark questions and one 1-mark question, etc. So these can relate on a range of things. They can relate on the whole course in general. They, like, for example, how many members of the chorus were there, or um, or like general knowledge questions. I doubt that it's going to be super. Sorry, I thought I heard something. I doubt that it's going to be super specific, but I doubt that it's going to be super specific. Like, what was the third stage of the judging period for the city Dionysia? So like, don't worry about it being too specific. But it can also relate on the play. So like, if they have a passage, they could say, who was Dionysus talking to, or they could say, what happens after this, or usually it is on a visual source. So like, what is the significance of this source, or who was the painter of this vase, or when was this vase, when from what date is this vase from, etc. Like questions like that. So you don't need to worry about them, because it's only 5 marks, but they are still 5 marks. So if you can answer them, try to. Um, you then have two 20-mark questions. So one of them will be on a passage, and usually on the passage, um, you it will be about, not very long, but they will usually ask you how the playwright makes this effective. So either an effective piece of comedy, or an effective piece of tragedy, and you have to kind of analyze it, not just like the language, but also like the effects that the playwright uses. And for this, it's 5 marks AO1, which is recall of information, and 5 marks AO2, which is like the evaluation and interpretation of the information. You then have another 10 marker, which is on one of the 14 visual sources, and they will ask you how useful the vase is. Unlike the previous 10 marker, where it can just be one paragraph, no conclusion, no introduction, no counter argument. for this you do need an counter argument, because you need points on why it is useful, but also points on why it isn't. And also note this. This is asking how useful it is as a source of information. This isn't saying how reliable it is. So if you do history, I don't do history, but like if you do history, don't get tripped up. But then again, if the vase isn't very reliable, then it's not going to be very useful. But just like don't get them confused. But and again the questions, and again it is 5 marks AO1 and 5 marks AO2. So in the evaluation of the reasons why it is useful or why it isn't useful are important. But again, it's only 10 marks, so it's not an essay. It can just be one long paragraph, though. Ideally, like why it is useful, why it isn't useful, and then overall if it is more useful or not useful. You then have one 20-mark question. So usually this will be also an example of the short answer questions, which I realized I forgot to give, was why for example, how are Pentheus and Dionysus related? So that was a question that I think came up once, and the question was that they're cousins and they share the same grandfather, and their mothers are sisters. Anyway, and then an example of a source question would be to what extent is this vase useful as a source of information for Greek comedy or something? You then have a 20-mark question. So this is usually going to be on a theme or a character. So the themes or characters, usually, it can sometimes be a sort of proposition question, but then they'll expand on that. And again, here it is equal. So 10 marks AO1 and 10 marks AO2. This is an essay, but it's kind of like a short essay, not a big essay. So you need like a teeny tiny introduction, a teeny tiny conclusion, and usually about 3 paragraphs with about 3 pieces of evidence in them. And they'll usually be asking, like, for example, to is how the chorus looked more how the chorus looked more important, or is how is what the chorus said which was more important to Greek theatre. Obviously they wouldn't say it like that, they phrase it more like concise. Or is the theme of sight and blindness more important in comedy or tragedy? And these questions, it can be about comedy, tragedy, or both. It could be about one play, or it can be about no plays. But it usually involves themes and characters, or Greek theatre like conventions, so like the chorus or costume, etc. Though it's unlikely to be on costume. And then you have that 30-mark question, which is a long essay. You should spend about 40 minutes on this. I realized that I forgot to include the timing. For this question, you should spend about 40 minutes on this. For the 10-mark questions, you should spend about 12 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes on them. And for the 30-mark question, you should spend about half an hour. It is um, I'm giving you slightly less time, so then you have time to answer the short answer questions and to like quickly check your work. But yeah, this is roughly. But then if you take slightly longer on one question, remember to take slightly less on the other question, otherwise you'll run out of time. But for the 30-mark question, this is slightly different. It is 10 marks AO1 and then 10 marks AO2. So you need more evaluation than evidence. But the exam board say that you shouldn't use it like that. You shouldn't say, okay, I need to make 10 points of information and 10 points and 20 points of evaluation. Like, not in that, it doesn't need to be in that ratio. You should just be careful of not just simply telling the story and just simply stating facts. Like, you need to include evaluation, because another thing that this question includes that you don't need for the other questions is modern scholarship, or in English literature they're called like critics quotes. So these are just ideas from scholars. You usually need about 2 to 3 per essays, or more if you can. But what's important is not just like stating them and stating who has said them. So like Swift states this, Renshaw states this, etc. And remember, you don't need to quote, but if you can quote, like even like a few words, that looks good. But if not, then don't worry. Like, don't stress about it. You not only stating it, but also not replying, but like evaluating it. So Renshaw states this. This illustrates how blah blah blah, and relate it back to the question. It can either counter your argument or support your argument. If you can do both in an essay, then that's great. And usually and unlike all the other questions, you have a choice of two. So you have this will be section B. So at the very end of the paper, you'll have two 30-mark questions. You should only answer one because the exam boards have said if you answer two, like you're just disadvantaging yourself because then you have significantly less time on the paper. So don't answer both. Answer which one you feel more comfortable with. And these will, like, for example, an example of question is who teaches who teaches more Greek theater or Greek comedy, or um or the first half of Frogs is funnier than the second half. And so as you can see, they're not just like simple questions, they're quite tense questions. I don't know how to explain, but they're nothing to worry about. I know at first it can seem scary, but just remember, like, as long as you know the content and know some modern scholarship, it will be okay. And as long as you practice essay writing. And yeah, that's all. So 13% of your A level. This is your second exam. I was meant to sit this exam, but A levels got cancelled. But I sat like a mock version of this exam twice. Actually, almost three times. But the first time, there was no 30-mark question. But yes, I've had some experience, and I also just double checked with like OCR, like the textbook. I know it seems like quite dense, but remember, so you only need to know half, and you don't even, for the what you do need. This is very very detailed, so you don't need to know everything. But what I was gonna say about the textbook is that at the end of the chapter, they include a really good what to expect for the A level exam, and they include lots and lots of good advice for the exam and like for hitting the areas and getting the top grades. So if you have this textbook, then use the exam section. It should be at the end of the first section, and if you don't, maybe your teacher will, or maybe there'll be a library of it or a friend, so maybe like borrow it. But even on Amazon, like they're £12, which isn't like, I know it's still expensive, but like it's not as expensive. Like my Spanish textbook was £27, and it was like half the size, so I was very surprised. And Spanish is much more popular than classics, so I was surprised as to why um it was so expensive. But anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. I hope this has been useful. I'm going to be uploading more classics videos, like the World of the Hero structure, exam like structure, and also how to get the top grades, and why to study classics, and how to use your textbook and modern scholarship, etc. So please keep an eye out for those if you do A-level classics. And yeah, I hope this is useful. Bye guys, and I hope you're all well during this awful corona crisis.